On a frozen mountain road where temperatures dropped to 20 below zero, a rugged mountain man found a little girl abandoned in a snowstorm, barely breathing. But saving her life would lead him to a discovery so massive it would change everything he thought he knew about his own past. Before we explore this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind howled through the Colorado Rockies like a living thing, angry and relentless. It tore at the pine trees, ripped through valleys, and turned the mountain roads into ribbons of ice and death. The locals in Pine Ridge had been warned. The Weather Service had issued alerts for 3 days straight. This wasn't just another winter storm. This was the kind of blizzard that killed people who weren't prepared. The kind that made the mountains feel less like wilderness and more like a graveyard waiting to claim the careless. Marcus Brennan knew these mountains better than most men knew their own backyards. He'd lived up here for 15 years, ever since the world below had become too painful to bear. His cabin sat at 7,800 feet, tucked into a clearing he'd carved out himself with nothing but an axe, determination, and a desperate need to disappear. He was 52 years old now, though the mountains had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with numbers. His face was weathered like old leather, creased with lines that spoke of harsh winters and harsher memories. His hands were calloused and scarred, the kind of hands that had built things, broken things, and buried things he'd rather forget. Before the mountains, Marcus had been a construction foreman in Denver. He'd had a wife named Sarah with a laugh that could light up a room. He'd had a daughter named Lily who'd inherited her mother's eyes and his stubborn streak. They'd lived in a modest house in the suburbs with a mortgage they were actually ahead on and dreams of someday buying a little place in the mountains for summer vacations. But life has a way of shattering dreams without warning, without mercy. 12 years ago, on a Tuesday evening in October, a drunk driver had crossed the center line on Interstate 25. Sarah and Lily had been coming home from a dance recital. The collision had been instant, catastrophic. Marcus had been at a job site when he got the call. By the time he reached the hospital, they were both gone. Just like that. One moment he'd had a family, a future, a reason to wake up in the morning. The next moment he'd had nothing but a hole in his chest where his heart used to be. He'd tried to keep going. God knows he'd tried. But every corner of that house held memories that cut like broken glass. Lily's room with her stuffed animals still arranged on the bed, Sarah's coffee mug still sitting by the sink, the silence that screamed louder than any sound. So 3 years after the accident, Marcus had sold everything, packed what little he needed into a truck, and driven until the roads ran out. Then he'd walked until even the trails disappeared. And there, in a place so remote that even the maps seemed uncertain, he'd found a clearing with an old, half-collapsed cabin barely standing against the elements. He'd rebuilt it, slowly, methodically, one log at a time. The work had been brutal, but that was the point. He'd needed something that hurt his body so his mind could rest. He'd needed exhaustion that led to dreamless sleep instead of nightmares, and for 15 years it had worked. Sort of. He wasn't happy, but he wasn't drowning either. He existed. He survived. He woke up, chopped wood, hauled water, hunted when he needed meat, and kept the world at arm's length. Once a month he made the trek down the mountain to Pine Ridge, a town so small it barely qualified as a dot on the map. Population 347, though Marcus suspected that number was generous. He'd buy supplies, avoid conversation, and head back to his isolation. The locals had learned not to pry. The mountain man, they called him. Some thought he was running from the law. Others thought he was just crazy. Marcus didn't care what they thought. Their opinions stopped mattering the day his family died. This trip had been routine. January, middle of the month, bitter cold but manageable. He'd restocked on flour, coffee, batteries, and kerosene. He'd nodded at the store clerk, a woman named Patty, who'd long since stopped trying to make small talk. He'd loaded his old Ford truck, a 1998 F-250 that ran more on stubbornness than proper maintenance, and headed back up the mountain road just as the first flakes started to fall. The weather report had mentioned snow, but weather reports always mentioned snow this time of year. What they hadn't adequately conveyed was the sheer violence of what was coming. By the time Marcus was halfway up the mountain, the flakes had turned into a white curtain so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in less than an hour. The wind had picked up, turning the falling snow into horizontal daggers of ice. Marcus knew these roads like the back of his hand, but even familiarity couldn't help when you couldn't see the road at all. He slowed to a crawl, leaning forward over the steering wheel, squinting through the windshield as the wipers fought a losing battle against the accumulating snow. The heater in the old Ford was wheezing, struggling to keep up with the cold seeping through every crack and seal. His breath came out in visible puffs despite the blowing air. He was maybe 3 miles from his cabin when he saw it, or rather, when he almost didn't see it. A shape in the snow, off to the right side of the road. At first, he thought it was a fallen branch, maybe a small animal that had frozen in the storm. He almost kept driving. Almost. But something made him stop. Some instinct, some whisper in the back of his mind that said this wasn't right. This was different. Marcus put the truck in park and grabbed his flashlight from the glove box. He pulled his coat tighter, tugged his hat down over his ears, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, 20 below zero, maybe colder with the wind chill, the kind of cold that could kill you in minutes if you weren't careful. He clicked on the flashlight and trudged toward the shape, boots crunching through snow that was already knee-deep in places. As he got closer, his heart stopped. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, curled on her side in the snow. She was wearing a thin pink jacket, completely inadequate for this weather, and jeans that were soaked through. No hat, no gloves. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, dusted with snow. Her lips were blue. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his mind racing. She wasn't moving. For one terrible moment, he thought he was too late, thought he was kneeling beside another body, another death he couldn't prevent. But then he saw it, the faintest rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, barely, but breathing. He didn't waste time with questions he couldn't answer. Where did she come from? How did she get here? Why was she alone in a blizzard? Those questions could wait. Right now she was dying, and he was the only chance she had. He scooped her up as gently as he could. She was so light, so small. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. She didn't respond to being moved, didn't cry out or struggle. That scared him more than anything. A child this cold, this unresponsive, was in serious trouble. Marcus carried her back to the truck and laid her across the bench seat. He cranked the heater as high as it would go and grabbed every blanket he had from behind the seat. He wrapped her carefully, knowing that warming her too quickly could be just as dangerous as the cold itself. His hands shook as he worked, not from the cold but from something else. Fear, purpose, feelings he hadn't allowed himself in over a decade. He had a choice to make. The smart thing would be to turn around, head back down to Pine Ridge, get her to a hospital. But the storm was getting worse by the minute. The road down was treacherous even in good weather. In this, he'd be lucky to make it a mile before sliding off into a ravine. And this little girl didn't have time for luck. His cabin was maybe 15 minutes away if he drove carefully. It had heat, shelter, and he had basic medical supplies. It wasn't a hospital, but it was closer and safer than trying to navigate this storm. Marcus put the truck in gear and started driving. The 3 miles to his cabin felt like 30. The truck slipped and slid on the icy road. Twice he nearly went off the edge. But he kept going, kept fighting, kept one hand on the wheel and the other checking to make sure the little girl was still breathing. She never made a sound, just lay there, wrapped in blankets, her face pale as moonlight. When he finally pulled up to his cabin, relief flooded through him. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut against the wind, and laid her on his bed, the only bed in the one-room cabin. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to embers, but he stoked it quickly, feeding in logs until flames roared back to life. The cabin wasn't much: rough timber walls, a stone floor, furniture he'd built himself, but it was warm and dry and solid. Marcus had done construction work for years, but he'd also been a volunteer EMT back in Denver, back in his old life. The training came back now, muscle memory and knowledge he hadn't used in over a decade. He checked her pulse, weak and thready, her breathing shallow and irregular, her core temperature dangerously low, hypothermia severe. She needed to be warmed slowly, carefully. Too fast, and he could send her into shock or cardiac arrest. He removed her wet clothes, trying not to think about how wrong this all was. A strange little girl alone on a mountain, abandoned in a storm that could kill grown men. He wrapped her in dry blankets, placed hot water bottles wrapped in towels near her core, and monitored her breathing every few minutes. He made weak tea with honey and managed to get a few drops between her lips, hoping her swallow reflex would kick in. It did, barely. For the first few hours, he wasn't sure she'd make it. She remained unconscious, her breathing sometimes stopping for seconds that felt like hours before starting again. Marcus sat beside the bed, watching her the way he'd once watched over Lily when she'd had the flu at age 4. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. He pushed it away. This wasn't Lily. Lily was gone. This was someone else's daughter, someone else's little girl, and she needed him to focus. The storm raged outside for the next 2 days. The wind screamed like a living thing. Snow piled up against the cabin walls until Marcus could barely open the door. He didn't leave her side except to feed the fire, melt snow for water, and try the radio. But the storm had knocked out all communication. Static was all he got, endless static that offered no hope of calling for help. On the second day, she opened her eyes. It happened suddenly, no warning. One moment she was unconscious, the next her eyes were wide and terrified, staring up at the rough timber ceiling of the cabin like she didn't know where she was or how she got there. Marcus was adding wood to the fire when he heard her whimper. He turned and saw her trying to sit up, panic written across her small face. Hey, it's okay," he said, raising his hands in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She stared at him with huge brown eyes filled with fear. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and pressed herself against the wall behind the bed. "My name's Marcus," he said, keeping his voice soft and even. "I found you on the mountain, in the snow. You were really cold. I brought you here to warm up." She didn't respond, just watched him with those enormous eyes. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. Nothing, just silence and fear. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" A slight nod. Progress. Marcus moved slowly, deliberately, making sure she could see every movement. He poured water from a pitcher into a metal cup and brought it to her. She took it with trembling hands and drank in small sips, watching him over the rim like he might attack at any moment. "There's soup on the stove," he said. "Just vegetable soup. Nothing fancy. But it's hot and it'll help you feel better." He ladled some into a bowl and brought it to her with a spoon. She ate mechanically, like she wasn't really tasting it, just going through motions. But she ate, and that was good. That meant she was coming back, fighting her way out of the hypothermia that had nearly killed her. It took 3 more days before she spoke. 3 days of Marcus giving her space, feeding her, keeping the cabin warm, and trying not to push. He'd catch her watching him sometimes when he was chopping wood or cooking. Her expression was always the same, cautious curiosity mixed with lingering fear. She clutched a stuffed rabbit that had been in her jacket pocket, the only possession she'd had with her. It was worn and dirty, one ear hanging by a thread, but she held onto it like it was the most precious thing in the world. On the 5th day, Marcus was carving a piece of wood by the fire when she finally spoke. "Emma?" Her voice was so soft he almost didn't hear it. He looked up. "What was that?" "My name is Emma," she said again, a little louder this time. Marcus smiled. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. "That's a beautiful name. How old are you, Emma?" She held up 7 fingers. 7. That's a good age. She watched him carve for a while, then asked, What are you making? Just a bird, he said, showing her the rough shape taking form in the wood. A cardinal. They're all over these mountains in the summer. Can I try? Marcus hesitated. The knife was sharp, dangerous, but something in her eyes made him say yes. He found a smaller, duller knife he used for detail work and a soft piece of pine. He showed her how to hold it, how to cut away from herself, how to let the wood guide her hands. She was tentative at first, then more confident. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated, the same way Lily used to do. The memory didn't hurt as much this time. Over the next week, Emma slowly emerged from her shell. She was still quiet, still cautious, but she began to talk in fragments. She told him she'd been in a car with her Uncle Ray. They'd been driving up the mountain when they'd crashed. Uncle Ray had told her to wait in the car, said he'd be right back, but he never came. She'd gotten cold, so cold, and decided to find help. She'd walked until she couldn't walk anymore. Then she'd laid down in the snow. Marcus listened, his jaw tight. No car crash had been reported. He'd been down that road dozens of times since finding her. There was no car, no debris, no sign of an accident. Either Emma was confused from the hypothermia or her Uncle Ray had lied to her. Neither option was good. "Do you know where your parents are?" Marcus asked gently one evening as they ate dinner. Emma's face fell. "My mummy died. 2 years ago. She got sick." "I'm sorry, honey. What about your daddy?" "Never met him. Mummy said he left before I was born." "So you've been living with your Uncle Ray?" Emma shook her head. "I lived with Grandma Carol for a while. Then she got too old. Then Aunt Denise. Then Uncle Ray. He said we were going on an adventure." Some adventure, Marcus thought bitterly. Abandoning a 7-year-old in a blizzard. The storm finally broke after 9 days. The sky cleared to a brilliant, painful blue. Snow covered everything in a blanket so white it hurt to look at. Marcus knew he needed to get Emma to authorities, report what had happened, find out who this Uncle Ray was and why he'd left a child to die. But every time he mentioned going down the mountain, Emma would panic. Her eyes would go wide, her breathing would quicken, and she'd beg him not to. "They'll find me," she'd whisper. "Please don't let them find me." "Who, Emma? Who'll find you?" But she'd just shake her head and clutch her rabbit tighter. Marcus was torn. He knew the right thing to do. Call the sheriff, hand Emma over to social services, let the system sort it out. But the system had failed her already. Someone had put her in the care of a man who'd abandoned her in a snowstorm. And she was terrified, genuinely terrified, of going back. Plus, there was something about having her in the cabin that had changed things. The silence didn't feel as heavy anymore. The loneliness didn't cut as deep. He found himself looking forward to her questions, her small laugh when he did something she found funny, the way she'd fallen asleep curled up on the couch with her rabbit tucked under her chin. He told himself he'd wait a few more days, make sure she was fully recovered before making the trek down. Then a few more days became a week. Then 2 weeks. And somewhere in that time, without consciously deciding it, Marcus realized he wasn't ready to let her go. Emma seemed to sense the shift. She started calling him Marcus, then Mark. Then one morning at breakfast she asked, "Can I stay here?" The question hit him like a freight train. "Emma, you have family somewhere. People who care about you." "Uncle Ray didn't care. He left me." "Not everyone is like Uncle Ray." She looked at him with those big brown eyes. "You care. You saved me. You make me soup and teach me to carve and don't yell when I have bad dreams." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "It's not that simple, honey." "Why not?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Or rather, he had too many answers, and none of them seemed to matter when she looked at him like that. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Marcus sat by the fire and stared at the flames. He'd come to these mountains to hide from life, to avoid the pain of caring about anyone ever again. And now here was this little girl who'd literally fallen into his lap, offering him something he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose, connection, family. But he also knew it couldn't last. The world would come calling eventually. Questions would be asked. And a middle-aged hermit with no legal standing had no right to keep a 7-year-old girl, no matter how much they'd both grown attached. The next morning, Emma was exploring the cabin while Marcus made breakfast. She'd grown comfortable in the space, treated it like her own. She'd taken to organizing his sparse shelves, drawing pictures on old paper he'd given her, even helping with small chores like gathering kindling. She was in the corner near his bed when she stopped and cocked her head. "Mark? Yeah? There's a weird sound here." "What kind of sound?" "Like hollow. The floor sounds different." Marcus walked over. Emma was standing on a section of floor near the wall. He'd never paid much attention to it before. The whole cabin was rough, built more for function than perfection. But now that she mentioned it, when he stepped on that spot, it did sound different. Hollow. He knelt down and ran his hands across the floorboards. They looked the same as all the others, rough timber laid close together. But when he pressed on one, it shifted slightly. He frowned and pressed harder. The board lifted, revealing a gap underneath. Emma watched with wide eyes as Marcus worked the board free. Beneath it was another board, and beneath that, darkness. He grabbed his flashlight and shined it down. Instead of earth or the crawl space he expected, he saw something else. Stone steps leading down into blackness. "What is it?" Emma whispered. Marcus stared into the hole for a long moment. He'd lived in this cabin for 15 years, rebuilt it from near ruins, and he'd never known this was here. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I think we're about to find out." He looked at Emma, saw the mix of fear and excitement on her face, and made a decision. Whatever was down there had been hidden for a reason. And after everything that had happened, after finding Emma, after keeping her safe through the storm, after feeling alive again for the first time in over a decade, he needed to know what secrets this mountain was still hiding. Because somewhere deep in his gut, Marcus knew this was all connected. Emma appearing on his road, the cabin he'd chosen 15 years ago, the storm that had nearly killed them both, and now this hidden entrance to God knows what. Nothing happened by accident. Not anymore. "Stay here," he told Emma. "Let me check it out first, make sure it's safe." But even as he said it, he knew she'd follow him down eventually. They were in this together now. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else since that night in the storm. Together. Marcus descended the stone steps slowly, his flashlight cutting through darkness that felt thick and ancient. The air was different down here, cooler, drier, like stepping into a sealed tomb that had been holding its breath for decades. Each step echoed with a hollow sound that made the space feel larger than it should be. Behind him, despite his instructions to wait, he heard Emma's small footsteps following. "I said stay up there," he called back without real conviction. "I'm scared alone," she replied, her voice small but determined. He couldn't argue with that. Truth was, he was glad for the company. There was something about this hidden passage that made his skin crawl, not with fear exactly, but with the weight of something significant, something that had been deliberately concealed. The steps were carved directly into the mountain stone, worn smooth in the centers where countless feet had walked before. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this passage. This wasn't a natural cave or a simple root cellar. This was intentional, engineered, built to last. At the bottom of the steps, maybe 20 feet down, the passage opened into a tunnel. Marcus swept his flashlight across the space and felt his breath catch. The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, but what caught his attention was the construction. Thick timber beams reinforced the ceiling and walls, old but remarkably well preserved. The wood was dark with age, but showed no signs of rot. Whoever had built this knew what they were doing. "It's like a mine," Emma whispered, pressing close to his side. "Kind of," Marcus agreed. "But mines usually have tracks for carts, ventilation shafts, evidence of digging. This is different. This was built to go somewhere specific." They moved forward carefully. Marcus tested each step before putting his full weight down, half expecting the ancient timbers to give way, but they held firm, solid as the day they were installed. Every 10 feet or so, another support beam crossed overhead, each one notched and fitted with precision that spoke of skilled craftsmen. The tunnel walls showed tool marks, evidence of handwork, picks and hammers chipping away at solid rock. About 50 feet in, the tunnel branched. Marcus paused at the junction, shining his light down each passage. The left branch sloped downward and seemed to curve back toward the mountain's interior. The right branch stayed level and appeared to run parallel to the surface. He chose right, following what felt like the main passage. Emma's hand found his, small and warm. "Mark? Are there bears down here?" "No, honey. Bears don't like going this deep underground. We're okay." They walked for what Marcus estimated was another 100 feet. The tunnel remained consistent in size and construction, roughly 6 feet wide and 7 feet tall. Tall enough for a grown man to walk upright comfortably, wide enough for 2 people side by side or for moving large objects. Then the passage opened into a chamber. Marcus stopped so suddenly that Emma bumped into his back. He raised the flashlight and felt his mind struggle to process what he was seeing. The chamber was massive, maybe 30 feet across and equally deep, carved out of the living rock and reinforced with the same timber construction as the tunnel. But it was what filled the chamber that made his heart pound. Crates. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were stacked neatly along the walls, each one roughly the same size, about 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. They were made of wood, old and weathered, but intact, and stamped on the side of each crate were markings. Marcus moved closer, his light illuminating faded letters and numbers. U.S. Army, War Department, Property of Us Government, and dates, 1943, 1944, 1945. "What is this place?" Emma breathed. Marcus shook his head slowly. "I have no idea, but these crates are from World War II. He approached the nearest stack and examined it more closely. The crates were sealed with metal straps and what looked like wax or tar around the edges. Preservation measures. Someone had wanted whatever was inside to last. He set down his flashlight and tried to pry one of the straps loose. It took some effort. The metal had corroded slightly over the decades, but eventually it gave way with a screech that echoed through the chamber. The lid of the crate lifted with surprising ease once the straps were removed. Marcus directed the flashlight inside and felt the breath leave his lungs. Gold. Bars of gold stacked neatly, each one stamped with official markings. He reached in with a trembling hand and lifted one out. It was heavy, maybe 20 pounds, the size of a brick but far denser. The surface was dull with age, but unmistakably gold. "Is that real?" Emma asked, her eyes huge in the flashlight's glow. Marcus turned the bar over in his hands, examining the stamps. United States of America, fine gold, 999, and a date, 1944. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's real." He set the bar down carefully and moved to another crate. This one opened more easily, the seals already partially broken. Inside were papers, documents sealed in waxed envelopes. He pulled one out and carefully opened it. Bonds. U.S. Treasury bonds dated 1945, each one for $10,000. He counted quickly. 50 bonds in the envelope, $500,000. And there were dozens of envelopes in this crate alone. A third crate held currency, not U.S. dollars, but bills from other countries. British pounds, French francs, German marks, Italian lira, all neatly bundled and wrapped in protective paper. Some of it was probably worthless now, currency from regimes that no longer existed. But some of it, the British pounds especially, might still have value. Marcus moved through the chamber in a daze, opening crate after crate. Paintings wrapped in oilcloth, portraits and landscapes by artists whose signatures he didn't recognize, but whose work was clearly professional. Jewelry boxes filled with diamond necklaces, gold watches, pearl strands, gem-encrusted brooches, silver candlesticks and serving pieces, rare coins in protective cases, even a crate full of nothing but paper, stock certificates from companies he'd never heard of. The sheer volume was staggering. This wasn't a small cache. This was a fortune, multiple fortunes, tens of millions of dollars at minimum, possibly much more depending on the value of the artwork and the rarity of the coins and bonds. Emma had wandered to the far side of the chamber, where a different kind of container sat. Not a military crate, but a wooden trunk, civilian-made, with brass fittings and a leather handle. "Mark, what's this one?" Marcus joined her and knelt beside the trunk. Unlike the crates, this one wasn't locked or sealed. He lifted the lid and found it full of personal items. Photographs, ledgers, letters, personal effects. He pulled out the top item, a leather-bound journal. The first page had a name written in careful script, Theodore Hartley. Marcus sat back on his heels. Theodore Hartley. That name meant something. He searched his memory, trying to place it. Then it clicked. Back in Denver, back in his old life, there had been a museum dedicated to Colorado's industrial history. He'd taken Lily there once when she was 5. There had been an exhibit about the state's wealthy families, the men who'd made fortunes in mining, railroads, and manufacturing in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Theodore Hartley had been one of them, a steel magnate if Marcus remembered correctly, one of the richest men in Colorado during his time. Marcus opened the journal and began to read by flashlight. The entries started in January of 1943. Hartley's handwriting was meticulous, each word carefully formed. The early entries detailed his growing concern about the war, about the possibility of economic collapse, about political instability. He wrote about meetings with other wealthy men, discussions about protecting their assets, about rumors of government seizures and wealth redistribution. By mid-1943, Hartley had made a decision. He would move a significant portion of his wealth to a secure location, somewhere the government couldn't easily access, somewhere he could retrieve it if the world descended into chaos. He'd purchased land in the mountains under a false name. He'd hired men he trusted to excavate the tunnel and chamber. He'd spent months moving assets piece by piece, disguising shipments, using trusted intermediaries. The journal detailed every item brought to the cache, every gold bar, every bond, every painting. Hartley had kept meticulous records. By Marcus's rough count, the industrialist had hidden over $20 million in this chamber. And that was in 1940s money. Adjusted for inflation and appreciation, especially the gold and artwork, this cache could be worth $100 million or more. The final entry was dated July 7, 1946. It was shorter than the others, almost hurried. "The war is over. The world did not end. But I cannot bring myself to retrieve what I've hidden. It feels like blood money now, wealth hoarded while others suffered. Perhaps someday, when I'm gone, someone will find this and make better use of it than I ever could. Let it serve a greater purpose than feeding one old man's fears." Touch! Marcus closed the journal slowly. Theodore Hartley had died in late 1946, according to what little Marcus could remember from that museum exhibit. A stroke or heart attack, sudden and unexpected. He'd died without telling anyone about this cache. The land had probably passed through his estate, sold off to pay debts or taxes, the secret dying with him. And eventually, 70-some years later, the land had ended up in the hands of a hermit from Denver who'd bought it for almost nothing because no one else wanted remote mountain property with no road access and a half-collapsed cabin. Marcus had never bothered to research the property history. He just wanted isolation, wanted a place the world had forgotten. Turned out the world had forgotten more than just the land. "Mark," Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts, "does this mean we're rich?" He looked at her, this 7-year-old girl who'd nearly died in a snowstorm, who'd been abandoned by the one person who should have protected her, who'd somehow ended up in his care through a combination of chance and providence. And he looked at the fortune surrounding them, wealth beyond anything he'd ever imagined possessing. "I don't know what this means," he said honestly. But even as he said it, his mind was racing. Legally, this was complicated. The land was his, purchased legally and owned outright. But this cash had been hidden here long before he bought the property. Did that make it his? Or did it belong to Hartley's estate? Were there descendants with a claim? And what about the US government? Some of these items had military markings. Would they want them back? And there was another problem. The moment he reported this, his life would change forever. The isolation he'd built would shatter. There would be media attention, legal battles, people crawling all over his mountain. The peace he'd found would be destroyed. But could he really just keep this secret? Pretend he'd never found it? Walk away from a fortune that could change lives, fund schools, help communities? "Can we stay here?" Emma asked, pulling his attention back. "In the cabin, with you?" Marcus felt his chest tighten. There it was again. That question he didn't know how to answer. "Emma, it's complicated. You have family somewhere. People who left me in the snow," she interrupted, her voice harder than he'd ever heard it. "Uncle Ray left me. He told me to wait and he never came back. I could have died." "I know, honey, but not everyone." "You didn't leave me. You found me, and you saved me, and you've been nice to me every single day." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back." Marcus pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with sobs she'd been holding in for who knows how long. Over her shoulder, he stared at the crates full of gold and bonds and forgotten wealth. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 15 years on this mountain trying to escape from caring about anyone. And now here was this little girl asking him to care, begging him not to send her away. And here was a fortune that would make hiding impossible. What happens next will turn Marcus's quiet mountain life upside down, reveal a conspiracy decades in the making, and force him to choose between the isolation he craved and the family he never thought he'd have again. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. That night, back in the cabin with the hidden entrance sealed again, Marcus made Emma her favorite dinner, canned soup with crackers. She was quieter than usual, the excitement of the discovery dampened by uncertainty about the future. After she fell asleep on the couch, clutching her worn rabbit, Marcus sat at his small table with a lantern and the journal he'd brought up from the chamber. He read more of Hartley's entries, learning about the man who'd hidden this fortune. Theodore Hartley had been 53 when he started the cache, a widower with no children. He'd made his money in steel production during the industrial boom of the late 1800s. He'd been by all accounts a hard man, driven and ruthless in business. But the journal revealed something else. Doubt, fear. A growing sense that he'd wasted his life chasing wealth that meant nothing. One entry from March of 1945 stood out. "I walk past homeless veterans on the street every day, men who gave everything for this country while I sat in my mansion counting my money. What have I built? What legacy do I leave? Steel that rusts, money that spends. A name that will be forgotten within a generation." Another entry from December of 1945. "Visited the Children's Hospital today. Saw a little girl, maybe 6 years old, dying of pneumonia because her family couldn't afford proper care. I could have paid for her treatment with what I spend on cigars in a month. Instead, I stood there with my hat in my hands and offered empty condolences. What kind of man does that make me?" The journal painted a picture of a man who'd realized too late that wealth without purpose was just weight. Hartley had died alone, his fortune hidden, his regrets documented in careful handwriting that no one had read for over 70 years. Until now. Marcus closed the journal and looked at Emma, peaceful in sleep despite everything she'd been through. He thought about Hartley's words, about wasted lives and empty legacies. He thought about his own 15 years in isolation, hiding from pain, refusing to engage with a world that had hurt him so deeply, and he thought about the past 3 weeks. How Emma had brought life back into this cabin. How her questions and laughter had filled the silence. How teaching her to carve wood had reminded him of teaching Lily to ride a bike. How reading her stories at bedtime had made him feel like a father again instead of just a ghost haunting his own life. Maybe this was all connected. Maybe finding Emma and finding the fortune weren't separate events but part of something larger. He wasn't a religious man anymore, hadn't been since the accident that took his family, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this meant something. The next morning, Marcus made a decision. He wouldn't report the cache yet, not until he understood what he was dealing with. not until he figured out what to do about Emma. He needed time to think, to plan, to make sure whatever happened next was the right thing for everyone involved. Emma seemed to sense his decision without him saying anything. She smiled more that day, helped him chop vegetables for stew, asked if she could arrange the bookshelf in the cabin. Small things that spoke of a child settling in, making a space her own. That afternoon, while Emma drew pictures at the table, Marcus tried the radio again. The storm damage had been repaired apparently, because this time he got static with occasional voices cutting through. He tuned to the emergency frequency and listened. Nothing about a missing child. Nothing about an accident on the mountain road. Whatever had happened with Emma and her Uncle Ray, it hadn't been reported to authorities. That night, Emma had her first nightmare. Marcus woke to her screaming, thrashing in her sleep on the couch. He rushed over and gathered her up, holding her until the nightmare released its grip. "Shh, it's okay, you're safe. I'm here." She clung to him, crying into his shoulder. "He's coming back. He's going to find me." "Who, Emma? Uncle Ray?" She nodded against his chest. He said we were going to be rich, that we just had to find the right place, that my mummy's family owed us, and we were going to get what we deserved." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What do you mean your mummy's family owed you?" "I don't know. Uncle Ray was always talking about how Mummy's family was rich and they cut her off when she married my daddy. He said there was money hidden somewhere and he was going to find it. That's why we came to the mountains." Marcus's mind raced. Mummy's family, rich, money hidden in the mountains. This couldn't be a coincidence. "Emma, what was your mummy's last name before she got married?" Emma wiped her eyes. "I don't know. She never talked about her family. Uncle Ray said they were ashamed of her." "But Ray knew the family name?" "I guess. He had papers, old papers he'd look at all the time. He'd mark up maps and make phone calls and get real angry when things didn't work out." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in a pattern he didn't like. Ray had been searching for something, for hidden money connected to Emma's mother's family, in these mountains. And somehow that search had led him to abandon Emma in a blizzard. The next morning, while Emma slept late, Marcus went back down into the tunnel. He returned to the chamber and found Theodore Hartley's trunk. He dug deeper this time, past the journal and the ledgers, looking for something he'd glimpsed the day before but not examined closely. Family photographs. He found what he was looking for in a leather album, photographs from the early 1900s. Theodore Hartley with various people, business associates probably. And then, on one of the later pages, a photograph that made Marcus's blood run cold. It showed Hartley, older now, maybe in his 60s, standing beside a young woman and a little girl. The caption beneath read, "With my niece Evelyn and her daughter Margaret, Christmas 1942. Marcus studied the photograph closely. The little girl, Margaret, looked to be about 5 years old in the picture. She had dark hair and large brown eyes and a small, serious face. She looked exactly like Emma. Marcus sat in the chamber for a long time, that photograph in his hands, his mind working through the implications. Hartley had a niece named Evelyn, who had a daughter named Margaret. Margaret would be around 75 now if she was still alive, old enough to have had children of her own, grandchildren. He needed to know more. He gathered up several of the ledgers and photo albums and brought them back to the cabin. Emma was awake when he emerged, eating cereal at the table. "You went back down?" she asked. "Yeah, I wanted to check something." He spent the day going through the materials while Emma played quietly nearby. The ledgers contained detailed family trees and business records. Theodore Hartley had been an only child, but he'd had several cousins. One cousin, Evelyn Hartley, had married a man named John Calloway in 1935. They'd had one daughter, Margaret Calloway, born in 1937. According to the records, Evelyn had died in 1951. Her husband John had died in 1958. What happened to Margaret after that, the records didn't say. But if Margaret had survived, if she'd had children and those children had children, then there could be direct descendants of the Hartley family still alive. Descendants who might have a legal claim to this fortune, Descendants like Emma. Marcus looked up from the ledgers to find Emma watching him. "What are you reading?" "Just trying to understand who owned all this before." "The man in the journal? Theodore?" "Yeah, and his family." Marcus hesitated, then asked, "Emma, do you know anything about your mom's family? Where they lived, what they did?" Emma shrugged. "Mummy said her parents died when she was young. She grew up in foster homes. That's why she said we had to stick together, because we only had each other." "And your mom's name before she got married?" I think it was Calloway, maybe? I saw it on some papers once when we moved apartments." Calloway, Margaret Calloway's descendant. It fit, but Marcus needed to be sure. Over the next few days, Marcus became a man possessed. He used the radio to contact the library in Pine Ridge, asking them to search old records for Margaret Calloway. He learned that she'd married a man named Robert Chen in 1957. They'd had 2 children, a son named William and a daughter named Patricia. Patricia Chen had married a man named David Morrison in 1987. They'd had 1 daughter, Sarah Morrison, born 1989. Sarah Morrison, who died 2 years ago, leaving behind a 7-year-old daughter named Emma. Emma Morrison, who was the great-great-great-niece of Theodore Hartley, who had Hartley blood running through her veins, who had a legitimate claim to the fortune hidden beneath Marcus's cabin, and whose uncle, Ray Morrison, brother of David Morrison, had clearly known about the Hartley connection, had been searching for the hidden fortune, had brought Emma to these mountains as part of his search, had abandoned her when something went wrong with his plan. Marcus sat at the table late one night, all the pieces laid out before him. The family tree, the photographs, Emma's story, Ray's obsession, the hidden fortune. It all connected. Emma was a Hartley descendant. The fortune legally should probably go to her as the closest living relative. But she was 7 years old, a minor. She'd need a guardian, a trustee. And the only adult who'd come forward to claim guardianship so far was Ray Morrison. A man who'd left a child to die in a blizzard. A man who'd clearly been willing to use his own niece as a pawn in his treasure hunt. Marcus looked over at Emma, asleep on the couch as usual, her rabbit clutched tight. She trusted him, depended on him. And he'd come to care about her more than he'd cared about anything in 15 years. But the world was going to want answers. About the fortune, about Emma, about why a strange man was keeping a little girl in an isolated cabin without reporting her presence to anyone. The truth would come out eventually. It always did. And when it did, Marcus would need to have answers. Good answers, legal answers. Answers that protected Emma from men like Ray Morrison and protected the fortune from being stolen or misused. He thought about Theodore Hartley's last journal entry, about wealth serving a greater purpose, about regrets and wasted lives, and he thought about his own second chance, the way Emma had brought him back to life, the way caring for her had given him a reason to wake up each morning. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the fortune wasn't the real treasure. Maybe it was just the catalyst, the thing that brought together a broken man and a lost child who needed each other. Marcus made his decision. He'd contact an attorney, someone he'd known in his old life, someone he trusted. Daniel Rodriguez had been a friend back in Denver, a lawyer who specialized in complicated estates and property law. If anyone could help Marcus navigate this mess, it was Daniel. But he'd do it carefully. He'd document everything first, photograph the cash, establish the provenance of the items, create an ironclad record of what he'd found and when. He'd research Emma's family tree more thoroughly, and he'd make sure that whatever happened next, Emma's interests were protected. Because one thing had become crystal clear to Marcus over the past few weeks. He didn't care about the money, not really. Wealth had never been what he'd come to the mountains searching for. But Emma mattered. And if this fortune could secure her future, keep her safe, give her the life she deserved, then maybe it served exactly the purpose Hartley had hoped for. A greater purpose than feeding one man's fears. A purpose called family, called love, called second chances for people who thought they'd used up all their chances a long time ago. Marcus stood and walked to the couch where Emma slept. He gently adjusted the blanket that had slipped from her shoulders, tucked her rabbit closer to her side. She stirred slightly, murmured something in her sleep, then settled again. "I've got you," Marcus whispered. "Whatever comes next, I've got you." And somewhere deep in the mountain beneath his feet, 70 years of hidden secrets waited. But they could wait a little longer. For now, there was a little girl to protect, and a fortune to figure out, and a future to build from the ruins of the past. Marcus waited 3 more days before making the call. 3 days of documenting everything in the chamber, taking photographs with an old digital camera he'd bought years ago and barely used, cataloguing items in a notebook with meticulous detail. 3 days of watching Emma play and laugh and slowly become the child she should have been all along, free from whatever darkness her Uncle Ray had brought into her life. 3 days of wrestling with doubt and fear and the knowledge that once he made this call, everything would change. On a Tuesday morning, with Emma occupied drawing pictures of the mountains, Marcus climbed to the highest point on his property where cell reception was strongest. He pulled out the satellite phone he kept for emergencies, a device he'd used maybe 5 times in 15 years, and dialed a number he'd memorized but never forgotten. Daniel Rodriguez answered on the 3rd ring. "Rodriguez and Associates." "Daniel, it's Marcus Brennan." Silence. Then, "Marcus, Jesus Christ, man. I thought you were dead. It's been what, 12 years? 15, since I left Denver." 15. Daniel's voice softened. "How are you, brother? Where are you?" "I'm okay. I'm still in the mountains, and I need your help with something complicated." "Complicated how?" Marcus took a breath. "Legal complicated, estate law, property rights, maybe criminal law. And Daniel, this stays between us until I say otherwise. Attorney-client privilege. You know that. Talk to me." So Marcus talked. He explained finding Emma in the storm, her recovery, her fear of going back. He explained her Uncle Ray and the suspicious circumstances. He explained the hidden tunnel and the fortune beneath his cabin. He explained the family connection, the Hartley lineage, Emma's legitimate claim. He left nothing out, knowing Daniel needed the whole truth to help. When he finished, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're absolutely sure about all this? The fortune, the family connection, all of it?" "I've got photographs, documents, Theodore Hartley's own journals, and the family tree checks out. Emma Morrison is Margaret Calloway's great-granddaughter, Hartley's great-great-great-niece." "And this Uncle Ray?" "Ray Morrison. I haven't reported him because Emma's terrified. But Daniel, he abandoned a 7-year-old in a blizzard. Whatever he was planning, it went wrong and he left her to die. That's attempted murder, or at minimum felony child endangerment." "I know, but if I report it, Emma goes into the system, foster care, and Ray could fight for custody. He's her blood relative." Daniel swore softly. "This is a mess, Marcus. A big, complicated, dangerous mess. Can you help?" "Can I help? Man, I'm already packing a bag. Give me your coordinates. I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon." Daniel Rodriguez arrived 36 hours later in a rented Jeep, looking exactly like Marcus remembered. Fit, sharp-eyed, with graying hair and the kind of presence that filled a room. He'd been a public defender when Marcus first met him, a man who actually cared about justice instead of just winning cases. Now he ran a private practice, specializing in the kind of legal tangles most lawyers avoided. Emma hid behind Marcus when Daniel first walked into the cabin. She'd gotten used to their isolation, and strangers made her nervous. But Daniel knelt down to her level, smiled gently and said, "You must be Emma. I'm Daniel. I'm a friend of Mark's. I heard you're really good at drawing. Can I see some of your pictures?" That broke the ice. Emma showed him her drawings, explained who each stick figure was, pointed out the mountains and the cabin and the birds. Daniel listened with genuine interest, asking questions, making her laugh. Marcus watched and felt grateful. Whatever happened next, at least Emma would have someone on her side who saw her as a person, not just a legal problem. After Emma went to bed that night, Marcus took Daniel down into the tunnel. He watched his friend's face as they descended the stone steps as the chamber opened before them, as the reality of the fortune became undeniable. Daniel stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, his flashlight sweeping across crates and trunks. "Holy Mother of God," he whispered. "Marcus, this is real. This is all real." "I know. Do you have any idea what this is worth?" "Rough estimate? Somewhere between 100 million and 300 million. Depends on the artwork, the rare coins, whether those bonds are still valid." Daniel picked up one of the gold bars, hefted it, set it down carefully. "This changes everything. The legal complexity here is staggering. You've got property rights, estate claims, potential government interest in the military items, Emma's inheritance rights, Ray Morrison's claims as her guardian, and the question of what happens to a fortune that's been hidden for 70+ years. Can Emma claim it? Legally?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Probably. She's the closest living descendant we know of. Hartley died intestate according to what you found. No will, no designated heirs. The fortune never went through probate because no one knew it existed. Emma has the strongest claim as direct blood descendant, but she's a minor. She needs a guardian and trustee." Which brings us back to Ray Morrison. Daniel agreed grimly. "Tell me everything you know about him." Over the next week, Daniel worked with investigators he trusted to build a picture of Ray Morrison. What they found was ugly. Ray was 43 years old, unemployed for the past 6 years except for occasional cash jobs. He had a record: theft, fraud, passing bad checks. He'd served 18 months in county jail back in 2008 for running a real estate scam. He'd been obsessed with the Hartley fortune for years, spent time in libraries researching old families, tracking down rumors of hidden wealth. When his sister Sarah died 2 years ago, Ray had seen an opportunity. Emma was a Hartley descendant. If he could find the fortune and establish Emma's claim, he could control it as her guardian. He'd spent months researching property records in the Colorado mountains, looking for land that had once belonged to Theodore Hartley or his associates. He'd narrowed it down to 3 possible locations. Marcus's property was one of them. The car accident, Emma remembered, hadn't been an accident at all. Ray had driven up the mountain road deliberately, searching. When the storm hit and conditions got dangerous, he'd panicked. Rather than risk his own life trying to get Emma to safety, he'd told her to wait while he scouted ahead. Then he'd simply driven away, leaving her to freeze, figuring he could come back later and claim it was a tragic accident. That Emma had wandered off while he was getting help. Except Emma had survived, and Marcus had found her, and now Ray's plan was in ruins. "He'll come back," Daniel said. "Once he realizes Emma's alive, once word gets out about the fortune, he'll come back and claim his rights as her uncle." "Then we don't let word get out," Marcus said. "Not yet. We secure everything first. We establish Emma's claim, document her lineage, and we make sure Ray Morrison can't get within 100 miles of her or this money." "Marcus, I need to ask you something." Daniel's voice was serious. "What's your interest in all this? Are you trying to claim the fortune for yourself? Use Emma to access it?" Marcus met his eyes steadily. "No, I don't care about the money, Daniel. I came up here 15 years ago to be alone, to hide, and for 15 years that's exactly what I did. Then Emma literally fell into my life, and for the first time since Sarah and Lily died, I felt something again. She needs protection. She needs someone who'll put her interests first. And I'm the only one who's shown up so far who actually gives a damn about her as a person, instead of as a means to wealth." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, then here's what we do. We file for emergency guardianship for you. We report Ray's abandonment to authorities. We establish Emma's claim to the estate. We create a trust with you as trustee until she comes of age. And we prepare for Ray to fight this with everything he's got." "How long will all that take?" "Weeks, maybe months. And Marcus, once we start this, there's no going back. The media will find out. Your isolation is over. Your life will never be the same." Marcus thought about Emma sleeping peacefully in the cabin above, about the way she'd started calling him Mark without fear, about the trust in her eyes when she looked at him. "My life already changed," he said quietly, "the moment I stopped on that road." The legal process began immediately. Daniel filed paperwork with family court in the county seat, a small town called Ridgeway about 60 miles from Marcus's property. He presented evidence of Emma's abandonment, her Hartley lineage, and the discovered fortune. He requested emergency temporary guardianship for Marcus and proposed the creation of a trust to manage the estate. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Emma continued to thrive in the cabin. She'd started reading books Marcus had ordered, simple chapter books about adventure and friendship. She helped him with chores, learned to identify different types of trees, asked a million questions about everything from why snow was white to whether bears really slept all winter. She was healing, becoming the child she should have been. Then Ray Morrison surfaced. He appeared at the courthouse in Ridgeway on a Monday morning, wearing a cheap suit and an expression of rehearsed grief. He filed a counterclaim, demanding custody of Emma and control of the estate as her closest living relative. He painted Marcus as an unstable hermit who'd essentially kidnapped a vulnerable child. He claimed he'd been searching for Emma desperately since the storm, that he'd survived the accident but couldn't find his way back to where she'd been. The judge, a stern woman named Patricia Brennan, no relation to Marcus, reviewed both claims and made a decision. Temporary custody would go to the state pending investigation. Emma would be placed in foster care while the court determined what was in her best interests. Both Marcus and Ray would be allowed supervised visitation. A full hearing would be scheduled in 60 days. The day they came to take Emma was the worst day of Marcus's life since he'd lost his first family. She clung to him, crying, begging not to go. "Please, Mark. Please don't let them take me. I'll be good. I promise I'll be good." "This isn't about being good, sweetheart. This is about the law. I'm going to fight for you. I promise. But you have to go with these people right now." "What if Uncle Ray finds me?" "He won't. You'll be safe, and I'll see you soon." The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Jennifer Hayes, had to physically separate Emma from Marcus. The little girl's screams echoed through the cabin long after the car pulled away. Marcus stood in the doorway, hands clenched into fists, watching until they disappeared down the mountain road. Then he went inside, sat at the table and wept for the first time in 15 years. Daniel found him there an hour later. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this is hard. She thinks I abandoned her, just like everyone else in her life." "No, she doesn't. She's scared, but she knows you're fighting for her." Daniel sat down across from him. "And we are going to fight. I've got investigators digging into Ray's background. We're building a case that'll show he's unfit. But Marcus, you need to understand something. The court is going to look at you too. A 52-year-old man living alone in the mountains with no visible means of support, no family, no community ties. You're going to have to prove you can provide a stable home for a 7-year-old girl." "I can, I will." "Then show them. Clean up your act. Get involved in the community. Take parenting classes. Create a home that looks like a home, not a hermit's cabin. Use some of that fortune to establish yourself as a responsible adult who can care for a child." Marcus looked around the cabin. It was clean but sparse. 1 room, 1 bed, minimal furniture. Not a place for a growing child. Not really. "What do I need to do?" "Everything," Daniel said, "and you need to start now." The transformation began the next day. Marcus drove down to Pine Ridge and walked into the community center. He signed up for parenting classes, the kind usually attended by nervous first-time parents half his age. He sat through sessions on child development, nutrition, establishing routines, creating safe environments. He took notes like his life depended on it, because Emma's life did. He hired a contractor to expand the cabin, added a second room, a real bedroom for Emma with space for a bed, a desk, shelves for books and toys, put in proper insulation, installed a modern heating system to replace the old wood stove, created a bathroom with running water instead of the outhouse he'd been using, turned his rough hermit's shelter into an actual home. He reached out to the school district, learned what Emma would need for enrollment, bought school supplies, clothes in her size, winter gear that would actually keep her warm. He even bought a smartphone and set up internet access so she could video chat with friends if she made any. Every week, he had supervised visits with Emma at the social services office in Ridgeway. She'd run to him, hug him tight, cry when it was time to leave, but he'd smile and tell her about the bedroom he was building, about the books he'd bought, about how he was learning to braid hair from YouTube videos so he could help her get ready for school. "You're really coming back for me?" she asked during one visit, her voice small and uncertain. "I'm not coming back for you, sweetheart. I'm bringing you home. There's a difference." Meanwhile, Daniel and his investigators were building the case against Ray. They found the evidence they needed in Ray's abandoned vehicle, discovered 3 weeks after Emma's rescue in a ravine 15 miles from Marcus's property. Inside were maps with Marcus's land circled, notes about Theodore Hartley and the missing fortune, and most damning, a handwritten plan that detailed how Ray intended to use Emma's claim to access the money and then relocate her to a facility where she wouldn't be a problem. The plan never explicitly said what kind of facility or what Ray meant by not being a problem. But the implications were chilling. They also found evidence that Ray had researched how to fake a child's death. Searches on his laptop for wilderness accidents, hypothermia timelines, how long before search and rescue gave up looking. He'd planned it. Planned to kill his own niece once she'd served her purpose. When this evidence came to light, the district attorney got involved. Ray Morrison was arrested on charges of attempted murder, child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. The bail was set at $2 million, which Ray couldn't begin to pay. He sat in county jail awaiting trial, his custody claim effectively dead. But the court still had to determine what was best for Emma, and that meant a hearing where both Emma and Marcus would have to testify. The hearing took place on a cold day in March, 3 months after Marcus had found Emma in the snow. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with fluorescent lights that hummed softly. Judge Brennan presided, her expression neutral and unreadable. The state's attorney argued that Emma should remain in foster care until a more permanent solution could be found. Perhaps relatives of her father could be located. Perhaps adoption to a traditional family with 2 parents and stability. Daniel stood and made Marcus's case. He presented evidence of the home Marcus had created, letters from the parenting class instructors praising Marcus's dedication, testimony from Jennifer Hayes, the social worker, who admitted that in her 20 years of experience, she'd rarely seen a foster placement where the child was as distressed by separation. Emma wanted to be with Marcus. That had to count for something. Then it was Emma's turn. She walked to the witness stand holding Jennifer's hand, wearing a blue dress that made her look even smaller than she was. She sat in the chair, feet dangling, and looked terrified. Judge Brennan smiled gently. "Hello, Emma. My name is Judge Brennan. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma nodded. "To decide where I go." "That's right. And I need to ask you some questions to help me make that decision. Is that okay?" Another nod. "Can you tell me about living with your Uncle Ray?" Emma's hands twisted together. "He was mean sometimes. He yelled a lot. He said I was a burden, but I was useful." "Useful how?" "I don't know. He just said I was worth something because of my family." "And what happened on the mountain? Can you tell me about that day?" Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "We were driving. Uncle Ray was looking at maps. He kept saying we were close, we were almost there. Then the snow got really bad. He stopped the car and told me to wait, said he'd be right back. But he never came back." "What did you do?" "I waited for a long time, but I got so cold, so I tried to find help. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. Then Mark found me." "Marcus Brennan found you?" "Yes. He picked me up and took me to his cabin. He made me warm. He took care of me." "Are you happy living with Marcus?" For the first time, Emma smiled. A real smile that lit up her whole face. "Yes, Mark is nice. He teaches me things and makes me soup and lets me help with stuff. He's building me a bedroom with shelves for books. He learned to braid hair for me." "Do you want to live with him?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Please, I want to go home." Judge Brennan looked at Marcus. "Mr. Brennan, Do you understand the responsibility you're taking on? Raising a child alone is challenging. Raising a traumatized child with no family support is even harder. Marcus stood. Your Honor, I've been alone for 15 years. By choice. Because I'd lost everything that mattered, and I couldn't handle the pain of caring again. Then Emma came into my life, and for the first time since my wife and daughter died, I had a reason to wake up in the morning. A reason to be better. She needs me, and honestly, I need her. I know I'm not traditional. I know I'm not perfect, but I love that little girl, and I will spend every day of my life making sure she's safe and happy and knows she matters. The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan looked at Emma, then at Marcus, then at the pile of evidence and testimonies before her. I'm going to take a recess to consider my decision. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. That hour felt like a year. Marcus sat on a bench outside the courtroom, Daniel beside him, neither speaking. Emma was in a room with Jennifer, probably being given juice and cookies and reassurances no one could guarantee. When they reconvened, Judge Brennan looked tired but certain. I've reviewed all the evidence, I've considered the testimony, and I've thought long and hard about what serves Emma's best interests. She paused. Mr. Morrison's actions were reprehensible. He endangered this child for personal gain. He will face criminal prosecution. His custody claim is denied permanently. Marcus felt his heart leap. As for Mr. Brennan, the judge continued, I'll admit this is unusual. A single man in his 50s with no parenting experience and a history of isolation. But I've also seen the home he's created. I've read the testimony of professionals who've worked with him. And most importantly, I've heard from Emma herself. She looked at the little girl. Emma clearly loves Mr. Brennan and feels safe with him. And after everything she's been through, that matters more than convention. Judge Brennan picked up her gavel. I'm granting permanent guardianship to Marcus Brennan, effective immediately. Mr. Brennan will also serve as trustee of the Hartley estate on Emma's behalf until she reaches the age of 25. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Emma burst into tears. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Then Emma was running across the courtroom, and he was dropping to his knees to catch her, and she was in his arms saying, we can go home, over and over. Yes, sweetheart, Marcus whispered, his own tears falling freely now. We can go home. The drive back to the cabin felt different. Marcus's hands on the steering wheel were steadier than they'd been in months. Emma sat beside him in the passenger seat, buckled in safely, her stuffed rabbit in her lap, watching the mountains roll by with an expression of pure contentment. She was going home, not to a foster placement or a temporary shelter or another unfamiliar room with unfamiliar people. Home, to a place where she belonged, with someone who wanted her there. Mark? She said softly as they climbed the familiar winding road. Yeah, sweetheart. Are you my dad now? The question hit him square in the chest. He took a breath, thinking carefully about how to answer. Well, legally I'm your guardian. That means I'm responsible for you, for taking care of you and making sure you're safe and happy. But Emma, being a dad is more than just legal papers. It's about showing up every day and being there when you need someone. So if you want to call me your dad, if that feels right to you, then yeah, I'd be honored. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I think I want to call you Dad, if that's okay. Marcus had to blink back tears. That's more than okay. When they pulled up to the cabin, Emma gasped. In the 3 months she'd been gone, the transformation had been dramatic. The rough one-room structure she remembered had been expanded and improved. A fresh coat of stain made the timber walls glow warm and golden. A new porch wrapped around the front, complete with railing and steps that didn't creak. Smoke curled from a proper chimney instead of the old stovepipe. You really did build me a room, Emma breathed. Come on, I'll show you. Inside, the changes were even more striking. The main room now held a proper kitchen with a refrigerator that ran on solar power, a table big enough for 4, and a couch that didn't sag. But the real magic was through the new doorway. Emma's bedroom was painted a soft lavender, her favorite color. A real bed with a quilt patterned with mountains and stars sat against one wall. Bookshelves lined another wall, already filled with books Marcus had collected. A desk sat beneath the window, perfect for homework or drawing. And on the nightstand, a lamp shaped like an owl kept watch. Emma walked into the room slowly, touching everything like she was afraid it might disappear. "This is mine? Really mine? Really yours. We can change anything you want. Paint it different colors, rearrange the furniture, whatever makes you happy." She turned to him, eyes shining. "It's perfect. Thank you, Dad." And just like that, Marcus Brennan became a father again. Not to replace Lily, never to replace her, but to offer the same unconditional love to another little girl who desperately needed it. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Emma had nightmares sometimes, waking up crying about the cold and the snow and being alone. Marcus would sit with her until she fell back asleep, sometimes reading stories, sometimes just being present. She had to learn routines, bedtimes and mealtimes, and the rhythm of daily life in a real home instead of the chaos she'd known before. But she also blossomed. Her laughter came more easily. She explored the mountain around the cabin with fearless curiosity, always with Marcus nearby to make sure she stayed safe. She started calling the stuffed rabbit Lucky, because she said it had been lucky enough to survive everything with her. She helped Marcus cook dinner, standing on a stool to reach the counter, learning to measure ingredients and stir pots. And slowly, Marcus found himself healing too. The grief he'd carried for 15 years didn't disappear, but it softened. He could think about Sarah and Lily now without the crushing weight of guilt and loss. He could remember the good times without feeling like he was betraying their memory by being happy again. Emma had given him permission to live, really live, not just survive. 2 months after Emma came home, Daniel returned to the cabin with a team of specialists: art appraisers, numismatists, historians, and estate lawyers. It was time to properly catalogue the Hartley fortune and determine its exact value. The process took 3 weeks. Every item was photographed, authenticated, and appraised. The gold bars alone were worth over $50 million at current prices. The bonds, after complex legal work to establish their validity, totaled another $30 million. The artwork included 2 paintings by lesser-known but respected American artists from the early 20th century, valued together at $12 million. The rare coins, the jewelry, the silver, the foreign currency that was still valid, all of it added up. The final total made Marcus's head spin: $305 million. Emma Morrison, at 7 years old, was one of the wealthiest individuals in Colorado, and Marcus, as her guardian and trustee, was responsible for making sure that wealth was managed wisely. "So what do we do with it?" Emma asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Marcus had been thinking about that question for weeks. He'd thought about Theodore Hartley's journals, about the old man's regrets, about wealth hoarded while people suffered. He'd thought about Emma's future, about making sure she'd never want for anything, and he'd thought about the community that had started to embrace them, the people of Pine Ridge, who'd gone from suspicious to supportive as they'd learned Emma's story. "Well," Marcus said carefully, "some of it needs to go into a trust for you. For college, for when you're older and ready to make your own decisions. That's your inheritance, your family's wealth, and you should have access to it when you're ready." Emma nodded seriously, like she was a lawyer reviewing a contract instead of a 7-year-old in pajamas with owl prints. "But the rest of it," Marcus continued, "I think we should do what Mr. Hartley wished he'd done when he was alive. Use it to help people. What do you think about that?" "Like how?" "Like maybe we could help kids who don't have families, or people who get hurt in the mountains and need rescue, or schools that need books and supplies. Things that make life better for people who need help." Emma thought about this, her face serious. "Uncle Ray said money was for making yourself powerful, for getting what you want." Uncle Ray was wrong about a lot of things. Money is a tool, Emma. It can be used for good or for bad. We get to choose. She looked at him with those big brown eyes that still sometimes held shadows of everything she'd been through. "I want to choose good, like you chose good when you found me." Then that's what we'll do. The Hartley Foundation was established in April, 6 months after Marcus had found Emma in the snow. Daniel handled the legal work, setting it up as a non-profit with a clear mission, supporting orphaned and fostered children, funding mountain rescue operations, and preserving Colorado's historical sites. The foundation's board included Marcus, Daniel, and 3 other people they trusted: a social worker, a historian from the Colorado State Archives, and a retired search and rescue coordinator. The foundation started small. They funded new equipment for the Pine Ridge Volunteer Rescue Team, updated communications gear, medical supplies, cold weather equipment that could save lives when the next blizzard hit. They established scholarships for foster children in 3 counties, covering college tuition, books, and living expenses. They donated to children's hospitals and group homes. Word spread quietly at first, then more loudly as the media picked up the story. "Mountain Hermit and Rescued Girl Create Fortune for Good," read one headline. "Hidden Wablo 2 Cache Becomes Legacy of Hope," read another. Reporters wanted interviews, but Marcus politely declined most of them. This wasn't about attention, it was about action. But they did agree to one interview with a local news station, because Emma wanted to. She wanted other kids who'd been through hard times to know that things could get better, that there were people who cared. The reporter, a young woman named Alicia Chen, sat with them on the cabin's porch. "Emma, can you tell us what it was like being rescued by Marcus?" Emma thought carefully before answering, the way she always did now. "I was really scared and really cold. I thought I was going to die. But then Mark found me, and he made me warm and safe. He took care of me, even though he didn't know me. He showed me that some people are good, even when other people have been bad." "And Marcus, what made you stop that night? Most people would have kept driving in a storm like that." Marcus looked at Emma, then back at Alicia. "Honestly, I don't know. Something just told me to stop, to look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something else. But I'm grateful I listened." "What do you want people to know about the foundation you've created?" Emma spoke up before Marcus could answer. "We want people to know that everyone deserves help when they need it. Kids especially. Because kids don't get to choose what happens to them. But grown-ups can choose to help. That's what the foundation is for." The interview aired on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning, the foundation had received over 100 emails from people wanting to help, to volunteer, to donate their time if not their money. The response was overwhelming and humbling. As spring turned to summer, life settled into a new normal. Emma enrolled in the small school in Pine Ridge for the fall. She was nervous about it, worried the other kids wouldn't like her or would think she was weird because of her story. But Marcus worked with her, practicing social situations, teaching her that it was okay to be nervous, that everyone felt that way sometimes. They also began the process of making the tunnel and chamber into an official historical site. The Colorado Historical Society got involved, fascinated by the preservation of a World War II-era cache and the Hartley family history. They worked with Marcus to secure the site, install proper lighting and climate control, and create educational displays. The plan was to eventually open it for limited tours, turning it into a learning opportunity about Colorado history, the greatest generation, and the choices people make about wealth and legacy. Emma loved being involved in the project. She helped organize some of Theodore Hartley's personal items, carefully handling the old photographs and letters. She created her own display about what it meant to find family in unexpected places, featuring pictures of her and Marcus, her story of survival, and the journal entry where Hartley talked about wishing his wealth could serve a greater purpose. He got his wish, Emma told the Historical Society representative who came to review her work. His money is helping people now, helping kids like me. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Emma asked Marcus about his family. He'd told her bits and pieces, but never the full story. Now, with the sun setting and the air warm and safe, he found he could tell her. He told her about Sarah, about her laugh and her kindness, and how she'd made every room brighter just by being in it. He told her about Lily, about teaching her to ride a bike and reading bedtime stories, and the way she'd insisted on wearing her superhero cape to the grocery store. He told her about the accident, about the hole it had left in his life, about the 15 years he'd spent on this mountain trying to outrun the pain. Emma listened quietly, holding his hand. When he finished, she said, "Do you think they'd be happy that you found me?" Marcus thought about that, really thought about it. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think they would be. Sarah always said the best way to honor the people we love is to love other people too, to not let grief make us small. I forgot that for a long time, but you reminded me." "I'm glad I reminded you," Emma said. Then, softer, "I think my mom would be happy too, that I found you." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead. The mountains loomed dark against the deepening blue sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Lucky the rabbit sat on the porch railing between them, keeping watch over the family he'd helped survive. By the time Emma started 3rd grade that fall, the foundation had helped over 200 children in Colorado. Scholarships were awarded. Medical bills were paid for kids whose families couldn't afford treatment. Therapy was funded for children dealing with trauma. Group homes received donations of books, games, and supplies. And every single person helped received a card that read, "From the Hartley Foundation, because everyone deserves a chance." Emma thrived in school. She made friends, joined the art club, and discovered she was good at math. She still had hard days, times when the memories of the cold and the fear crept back. But she had tools now to deal with them. A therapist she trusted, a father who never made her feel weak for struggling, and a growing sense that her story, as painful as it had been, could help other people feel less alone. Marcus had changed too. The isolated hermit who'd avoided human contact for 15 years was now involved in the community. He volunteered at the school, helping with building maintenance and teaching occasional classes about wilderness safety. He attended foundation board meetings and made decisions about how to allocate resources. He even made friends, something he'd thought impossible. Other parents from Emma's school, volunteers from the rescue team, people who saw him not as the weird mountain man, but as a dedicated father and community member. One Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after Marcus had found Emma in the snow, they decided to hike to the spot where he'd first seen her. It was Emma's idea. She wanted to see it again, to face the place that had almost been the end of her story. They packed a lunch and walked down the mountain road together. Emma had grown over the year, gotten taller and stronger. She wore proper hiking boots now, a warm jacket, a hat with a pom-pom on top. She looked nothing like the frozen, terrified child Marcus had scooped out of the snow. When they reached the spot, Emma stood quietly for a moment. The road looked different in autumn light, peaceful and beautiful instead of deadly. Aspen trees glowed gold on the hillsides. The air smelled of pine and earth. "This is where I stopped," Marcus said. "Right here. I almost didn't. Almost kept driving." "But you did stop," Emma said. "Yeah, I did. Why do you think, really?" Marcus knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. "Honestly, I think maybe some part of me knew I was supposed to. That finding you was supposed to happen. I don't know if it was fate or God or just dumb luck, but I'm grateful for it every single day." Emma hugged him tight. "Me too, Dad. Me too." They sat on the side of the road and ate their lunch, sandwiches and apples and cookies Emma had helped make. They talked about school and the foundation and what Emma wanted to be when she grew up. She was thinking maybe a social worker so she could help kids the way Jennifer had helped her, or maybe a teacher, or possibly a mountain rescue volunteer like the people the foundation now supported. "You can be anything you want," Marcus told her. "You've got time to figure it out." "What did you want to be when you were a kid?" Emma asked. Marcus thought back, way back, to a version of himself that felt like a stranger now. "I wanted to be a builder, someone who made things that lasted. Houses, bridges, things people could use and count on." "You did that," Emma said simply. "You built our home. You built the foundation. You built us a family." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. She was right. He had built something that lasted. Not out of wood and nails, but out of love and commitment and the decision to stop running from pain and instead run toward purpose. As they hiked back up to the cabin, Emma talked about an idea she'd had. What if we had a place? A real place where kids who don't have families could come. Not just like a group home, but somewhere special. Somewhere safe where they could heal and learn and just be kids. Like a camp? Sort of, but longer. Like a place they could stay while they're waiting for foster families or adoption, where they could go to school and have therapy and learn about nature and stuff. A place like you gave me, but for lots of kids. Marcus felt something click in his mind. A vision forming. That's a really good idea, Emma. We should talk to Daniel about it. See if the foundation could make something like that happen. Her face lit up. Really? You think we could? I think we could try, and trying is how everything good starts. The project took shape over the next year. The foundation purchased land about 10 miles from Marcus's cabin, a beautiful property with meadows and forests and a clear stream running through it. They hired architects who specialized in youth facilities. They consulted with child psychologists, social workers, and educators about what kids needed most. The Hartley House opened its doors in the spring of Emma's 4th grade year. It wasn't huge, capacity for 20 children at a time, but it was designed with love. Individual bedrooms, so every child had their own space. Common areas for meals and activities. A library, an art studio, a woodworking shop where Marcus taught kids to carve the way he'd taught Emma. Therapy rooms for counseling, classrooms for tutoring, and trails through the property where kids could hike and explore and remember that the world could be beautiful and safe. Emma was there for the opening, cutting the ribbon alongside Marcus and Daniel and the foundation board. She gave a speech she'd written herself, her voice stronger and clearer than it had been 2 years earlier. I know what it's like to be scared and alone, she told the crowd of supporters and media and the first group of children who would call Hartley House home. I know what it's like to think nobody cares, but I also know what it's like when someone does care. When someone stops and helps you even though they don't have to. This house is for all the kids who need someone to stop, who need someone to see them and help them. You're not alone. We see you, and we're here. There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Over the next few years, Hartley House became a model program. Kids came there broken and left stronger. Not fixed. Trauma doesn't work that way, but supported, equipped with tools and relationships and hope. Some were adopted into loving families. Some reunited with relatives who'd gotten their lives together. Some aged out of the system but stayed connected to the Hartley Foundation, which provided scholarships and mentorship and job training. Every child who came through Hartley House received the same thing Emma had received. Someone who saw their value, their potential, their humanity. Someone who believed they deserved better and worked to make better possible. Marcus and Emma's life continued to evolve. Emma grew into a confident, compassionate teenager. She still had Lucky the rabbit, now sitting on a shelf in her room, a reminder of how far she'd come. She excelled in school, played soccer, volunteered at Hartley House on weekends. She and Marcus had the normal fights that all parents and teenagers have about curfews and homework and cleaning her room. But underneath was a foundation of love that couldn't be shaken. When Emma turned 13, Marcus officially adopted her. It was just a formality. He'd been her father in every way that mattered since that day in the courtroom. But it meant something to both of them. Emma Morrison became Emma Brennan, and the judge who finalized the adoption was the same Judge Patricia Brennan who'd granted guardianship 5 years earlier. I had a feeling about you two, Judge Brennan said after signing the papers. Some families are born, others are built. Yours was built on a foundation stronger than blood, choice, commitment, and love. Ray Morrison never got out of prison. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 25 years. Emma never had to see him again, though she did write him one letter when she was 14. She told him she forgave him because holding on to anger was too heavy to carry. But she also told him that what he'd done was unforgivable, and that she hoped he'd spend his time in prison thinking about the people he'd hurt. She never got a response. She didn't need one. The story of the mountain man and the rescued girl became part of Colorado lore. Parents told their children about it. Teachers used it in lessons about kindness and second chances. The tunnel beneath Marcus's cabin was now a state historical site, visited by thousands of people each year who wanted to see where the Hartley fortune had been hidden and learn about the foundation it had created. But for Marcus and Emma, the story wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about the morning coffee they shared before school, the evenings spent on the porch watching sunsets, the inside jokes and the traditions they'd built. The way Emma still sometimes climbed into Marcus's bed during thunderstorms, even though she was too old for it. The way Marcus still checked on her before he went to sleep, just to make sure she was breathing. It was about being a family. On the 10th anniversary of the day Marcus found Emma, they held a special celebration at Hartley House. Over 100 people attended, kids who'd been helped by the foundation, families who'd been supported, volunteers and donors and staff. There was a ceremony where a plaque was unveiled, dedicated to Theodore Hartley and his dream of wealth serving a greater purpose. Emma, now 17 and preparing for college, gave a speech. Marcus sat in the front row, his hair more grey than brown now, his face lined with wrinkles that came from smiling instead of grief. 10 years ago, Emma began, I was 7 years old and dying in the snow. I'd been abandoned by someone who was supposed to protect me. I thought my story was ending, but it was really just beginning. Because a man I'd never met made a choice. He chose to stop. He chose to help. He chose to love a broken, scared little girl, even though it would have been easier not to. She looked at Marcus, her eyes bright. That man became my father. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And together, we took something that started in tragedy and turned it into hope. That's what this foundation does. That's what Hartley House does. We take the broken pieces and build something new. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. Theodore Hartley wrote that he wished his wealth could serve a greater purpose. Well, Mr. Hartley, it does. Because of you and because of my dad, hundreds of kids have been helped, families have been supported, lives have been changed. Your legacy isn't the fortune you hid, it's the hope you made possible. The crowd stood and applauded. Marcus wiped his eyes, not bothering to hide his tears. Emma stepped down from the podium and walked straight to him, hugging him tight. Thank you, she whispered in his ear, for everything, for choosing me. Thank you, he whispered back, for saving me right back. That night, back at the cabin that was now a real home, they sat on the porch with hot chocolate. The mountains stretched dark against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the pines. Dad, Emma said. Yeah? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night? If you'd just kept driving? Marcus thought about it. Sometimes. But then I remember that I did stop. And everything that's happened since then has been a gift. You've been a gift. I think we were gifts to each other, Emma said wisely. You needed someone to love. I needed someone to love me. The universe just put us in the right place at the right time. The universe and a pretty bad snowstorm. Emma laughed. Yeah, that too. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of knowing someone, of being family. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain he'd fled from, the isolation he'd chosen, the girl who'd appeared in his life like a miracle wrapped in tragedy, the fortune that had given them the means to help others, the foundation and Hartley House and the hundreds of lives touched. But mostly he thought about this moment, this peace, this sense of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in tunnels or vaults. Sometimes they're found on frozen roads on the worst night of your life. Sometimes they come in the form of a terrified child who needs you just as much as you need her. Sometimes the fortune you discover isn't measured in gold or bonds or rare artwork. Sometimes it's measured in second chances, in becoming a father again, in learning that your life can have meaning even after you thought all meaning was lost, in building something that outlasts you, something that helps people long after you're gone. Marcus had come to these mountains 15 years ago to hide from the world, to escape from pain and memory and the unbearable weight of loss. But in the end, the mountains hadn't let him hide. They'd given him back to himself, piece by piece, through a little girl who'd needed saving just as much as he had. The $305 million fortune had changed countless lives through the foundation. But the real fortune, the one that couldn't be measured or appraised or locked in a vault, was the family that had been forged in a snowstorm. A hermit and an orphan who'd found each other when they'd both lost everything else. That was worth more than all the gold in all the mountains in the world. "I love you, Dad," Emma said softly. "I love you too, sweetheart," Marcus replied. "Always and forever." And in that moment, sitting on a porch in the Colorado Rockies with his daughter beside him and the stars overhead, Marcus Brennan knew something with absolute certainty. He'd spent 15 years thinking his life was over, that the best parts were behind him, that he was just waiting to die. He'd been wrong. His life hadn't ended in that accident 12 years ago. It had just been waiting for a snowstorm, waiting for a little girl who needed help, waiting for a fortune to be discovered, waiting for second chances and new beginnings and the courage to love again. Anyone can find treasure if they're willing to look beneath the surface, to see past the rust and the darkness and the fear. But the real treasure isn't what you find. It's what you do with it. It's the lives you touch and the love you share and the legacy you build, not from gold, but from grace. Marcus had found his treasure on a frozen mountain road, and he'd spent every day since then making sure that treasure was shared with everyone who needed it. Because sometimes the greatest discovery isn't buried beneath your feet. Sometimes it's holding your hand, calling you Dad, and reminding you that the best parts of life are still ahead if you're brave enough to reach for them. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of hope, heart, and second chances. Click to continue the journey with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in tunnels, but in the connections we make when we open our hearts.